So here in Fjordland, it is a massive remote area, and the thing about Fjordland is there are legends related to the wildlife in this area. One of those being the legend of the Last Fiordland Moose. Now, moose are not indigenous to New Zealand. Much like all the other mammals in New Zealand, they were brought in for hunters to hunt. So deer, possum, rabbits, every mammal in New Zealand was brought in for hunters. And the bulk of the moose population, I believe it was 10 or so moose, were brought in the early 1900s, and they were dropped on the west coast, and they kind of spread out over this wide region of Fjordland. And because it's such a rugged area, the population never really took off. But over the years, there's been talk that there's one moose left in the rugged remote areas of Fjordland, and that has come to be known as the sort of the legendary creature, the Last Fiordland Moose. This is kind of up there with almost like a Bigfoot legend or something like that, right? Like, people have caught glimpses of them, they've heard them, what they thought was the Last Fiordland Moose. We actually came across a guy today on the trail who thinks he might have heard the Last Fiordland Moose just last night. James here was just telling us that he may have had a sighting of the Last Fiordland Moose.
An oral
he heard one.
Experience, a moose experience.
Tell us what you heard, man.
Well, I was at night time and there was a stag roaring outside where I was camped, and nearly at the same time there was the noise, which I'm not sure now whether it would be a noise that a red deer hind would make. I'd have to study up on that because they will make unusual sounds, but it did sound exactly like a female moose call. So the bull moose would just sort of grunt, and a female moose makes all the noises, right? And it was doing that sort of noise that a female moose would do.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you know if
this just cannot be possible?
Is the Last Fiordland Moose rumored to be a female? Do you know?
Well, it can't just be the last one. It would have to be a group of animals.
Right. But that's the legend, right? That there's one left in Fjordland, supposedly?
Well, that's, yeah, people talk about it in the singular, but I mean, I talked to Ken Tustin, who's the guy who has been looking for them. He had the trail cameras out. And
Right.
And he estimated from the browsing sign that he would see that there could be like a population of about 30, perhaps.
30, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
For you to come across one, or photograph one, or get the DNA from one, which he's got 2 lots of DNA.
How old is that?
You're talking more than one animal.
How old is the DNA
the
from?
Last DNA was from 2002.
2002, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
And the browsing sign that he was seeing in Herrick Creek sort of stopped, I think it was 2 years ago.
Okay.
So he's figuring that animal was probably the same animal had since died.
Oh.
But that doesn't mean it's the only one.
Right. If there's 30.
You just don't know because it's such a wildly big place. You could take 30 red deer, right? Paint a great big white X on them and then drop them out of a helicopter and then go looking for them a month later. You'll never see one.
Oh, with these sheer cliffs and just so much dense bush, it's just impossible to find anything out here.
And
so
people,
when you heard it, did you go out and look for it?
No. There was 2 other guys with me, hunters, and should I ask them if they heard that? Did they hear that?
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, no, they're just going to think you're stupid. I said, no, seriously. But I think one of them was snoring, so he didn't hear anything. But
so why is the legend or the story that there's only one left? Like the
I think people just refer to it in the singular, like the Fiordland Moose, and say, oh, but there's one.
One left.
No, well, there must be a bunch of them running around.
Do you have any thoughts on the Canterbury Big Cat?
The Canterbury Big Cat. The Canterbury Big Cat is sort of similar to a deer I shot once, which I thought was really quite a large deer, and so I aimed appropriately high for the distance. It ended up being like 3 feet tall. It was some miniature, tiny little thing that I thought was 300 meters away, but it was actually only 50 meters away.
Oh, wow. So you think it's just a regular cat that they thought was further away?
Feral cats get really big in the wild,
because
they subsist mostly on rodents, right?
Yeah.
You hear about them, they're eating native birds. No, if you dropped a cat out here and told him to make his living out here in this bush, he'd be dead in a month, because they can't fly, they can't catch birds.
Right.
But they live off rodents, mice and rats and stuff, and out in the bush there's a lot of rats and rats and mice and that, and they get really big. They do really well.
You don't think it has evolved to be the size of a panther yet? Maybe a couple more thousand years?
No, I don't think so. There was talk of releasing leopards in New Zealand,
When was that?
Just before the turn of the century. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say just before the story of the
Just
Canterbury
before
Big
the-
Cat.
yeah.
That's perfect.
Just before
to kill
that.
the cat.
Straight into
Put in
that.
leopards.
Straight into the leopard bit.
Yeah. Well, they'd probably take care of the rabbits too, right?
Well,
And the
they
possums.
released the rabbits because they wanted a fur industry.
Yeah.
That turned out to be a dramatic mistake.
Yeah.
Same
They
with
released-
possums, right?
Possums for a fur industry.
Yeah.
Dramatic mistake.
Yeah.
They released the stoats and the ferrets and the weasels to eat the rabbits, and then figured out that when the stoats and the ferrets and the weasels reached the west coast before the rabbits did, that they weren't eating rabbits, they were eating native birds.
Right.
So that was a mistake. So then they thought, well, let's release the leopards, and then that will eat the other stuff.
Wow.
And they all even were thinking about it. You know, there was a vote at the local council, and a couple of people said, no, it's probably not a good. They're going to eat your sheep. You know, obviously.
They're gonna eat the sheep.
It's not a good idea. Let's not
No.
release leopards.
Let's not do it for a change.
Right,
Let's not introduce another animal.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Infamous.